They trafficked heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana.
That's gonna be hard to get on! Alto Tupaco!
There's lots of different cartels, lots of different international mafias involved.
Out in the middle of nowhere, the Coast Guard spotted something strange. An object so low in the water it looked like it didn't belong. Boarding it was a gamble. It could sink at any second. But when the hatch finally cracked open, what they uncovered left even the most seasoned crews stunned. This wasn't a fishing boat. It was something far darker, built for stealth and designed to vanish into the sea.
Incredibly difficult for radar sensors to pick up.
The submersibles are invisible to the point that they're offloaded.
And inside it was a secret powerful enough to shock the world. Inside the Coast Guard's wildest narco sub bust. On June 18, 2019, the Coast Guard cutter Monroe came across a strange boat in the Eastern Pacific. It wasn't big, and it wasn't fast. Just a dull gray capsule moving at about 10 miles an hour, riding so low in the water that it almost disappeared into the waves. A small chase boat pulled up alongside. 2 Coast Guardsmen climbed onto the deck while it was still moving, and they started pounding on the hatch, shouting for it to open. After a tense moment, one of the smugglers inside lifted it from below. As the hatch swung open, the team finally saw what they were after. The cramped hold was packed wall to wall with cocaine bales, brick after brick, stacked as tightly as possible. When the final count came in, the load weighed more than 17,000 pounds. The Coast Guard has a name for these boats: SPSS, short for self-propelled semi-submersible. Most people just call them semi-subs or narco subs. They're not submarines in the traditional sense. They don't dive deep. They just sit so low in the water that only a little of the structure is visible. From a distance, they're almost invisible, and that's the point. They're designed to blend into the sea, run for hundreds of miles, and carry massive loads of cocaine without being noticed. What most headlines don't explain is that these boats are also built to destroy themselves. Hidden inside every semi-sub is a simple system called a scuttle valve. The design is crude but effective. Open the valve and seawater rushes in. Within minutes, the hold is flooded. The boat sinks and the drugs go with it. It's why boarding teams always move so quickly. They're not being dramatic for the camera. They're racing to stop the boat from vanishing right under them. These scuttle valves work reliably, and that means every boarding is a gamble. Crews have to make split-second choices about how long to stay inside, how many bales they can safely pull out, and when to retreat before the whole boat tips and goes down. There's a good example from September of 2019. That time, the cutter Valiant chased down a semi-sub about 40 feet long, also in the Eastern Pacific. On board was around 12,000 pounds of cocaine, but the hull was already unstable when the team arrived. They managed to get about 1,100 pounds out before the boat began to sink. At that point, they had to back off. The rest, more than 10,000 pounds, went down with the vessel. Sometimes, when a semi-sub sinks, investigators will try to recover the load later. That only happens if the conditions are right, if the sea state is calm enough and the wreck is shallow enough. In earlier cases, FBI technical divers have worked on the seafloor, pulling bales out of a sunken hull one by one. It's risky and slow, and it only happens if there's a strong reason to attempt it. To really understand why these boats are so dangerous, you need to picture what it's like inside one. Imagine a long, narrow tube with just enough space to sit upright. The air is hot and sticky. Diesel fumes hang in the cabin. Along the center line, or sometimes along one side, there's a thin walkway. Everywhere else, space is jammed with shrink-wrapped bricks of cocaine. The controls are basic: a throttle, a tiller or small wheel, and a few gauges. Navigation is handled with a handheld GPS. Communication might be a cheap radio, or in some cases, something better. In one seizure, the Coast Guard reported finding what they called a sophisticated radio, meaning the crew had stronger equipment than usual to stay in contact. There are no bunks, no real food storage, no comfort of any kind. Most of the available space is for cargo or fuel, and fuel takes up a lot of room. Engines pushing against constant drag burn through diesel fast, so the boats often carry extra tanks or flexible bladders just to make the run. The overall feel is not of a ship, but of a cramped, smelly delivery truck that happens to float. And these cases aren't limited to the Pacific. On March 22, 2024, a Coast Guard law enforcement detachment was deployed on the Navy cruiser USS Leyte Gulf in the Atlantic. They intercepted a semi-sub there, too. Navy photos show the cruiser, the helicopter overhead, and the Coast Guard boarding team working the target. It was the same kind of scene you saw in the Pacific 5 years earlier. Sometimes the danger isn't water, it's air. In March 2023, the Colombian Navy stopped a semi-sub about 50 feet long in the Pacific. Inside, they found 50,800 pounds of cocaine. They also found 2 crewmen dead and 2 others barely alive. Colombian officials explained that the men likely inhaled toxic fumes from a fuel leak. No shots fired, no chase, just poison air in a sealed tube. Another case shows just how cramped and slippery these boardings can be. In November 2023, the cutter Washe boarded a semi-sub carrying more than 5,500 pounds of cocaine. That day, the boarding team had to deal with the reality of a low, slick deck, a tiny hatch, and almost no space to stand. They had to control the crew, secure the space, and keep the boat afloat long enough to search. The scale is staggering. A single semi-sub can carry thousands of pounds in one run. That's why stopping just one matters. In the summer of 2025, the Coast Guard announced its largest single offload ever. More than 76,000 pounds of seized drugs at Port Everglades. That total came from a string of interdictions in the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean, some of them semi-subs and others fast boats. Seeing bales of cocaine stacked inside answers one question, but it opens another. How do you even build a machine like this in the jungle? The answer lies in a hidden supply chain, makeshift shipyards, and a kind of rough engineering that's evolved year after year. How cartels secretly build narco subs. If you've ever wondered where narco subs are born, the answer isn't a shipyard with cranes and steel. It's deep inside Colombia's coastal jungle, hidden under mangroves. Follow a river far enough and you'll hear it. The thump of a generator, the scrape of tools on wood. Step through the trees, and you'll see a secret boatyard. Canvas tarps strung overhead, planks laid across mud, and long fiberglass molds taking shape. These aren't fishing boats. They're the start of vessels built to slip cocaine past patrols at sea. Every piece of the operation has to be carried in by hand or floated in on small craft. There are no roads leading to places like this. A truck hauling fiberglass cloth or fuel drums would be spotted in minutes. So everything, wood frames, resin barrels, radios, batteries, comes in the same way food and fishing gear does, blended into normal river traffic, hidden under tarps, mixed with supplies no one questions. By the time the parts reach the yard, the canopy overhead mud makes sure satellites and planes can't see the shine of fresh fiberglass. Boats here don't start as one clean piece. Crews often build sections separately and stash them under trees. When the time is right, those parts get hauled to a creek and joined together. That way, the final assembly happens far from curious eyes. Colombian and Ecuadorian authorities who have walked into these camps later describe the same things over and over. Unfinished hulls resting on logs, spare diesel engines tucked under tarp shelters, fiberglass dust coating everything, and hammocks strung between trees where workers sleep. The boats that emerge from these jungle clearings generally fall into two groups. The first is the low-profile vessel known as an LPV. Picture a long, narrow boat that sits so low in the water you might mistake it for driftwood at a distance. Only a thin strip of hull and a tiny cockpit rise above the waves. That low stance isn't cosmetic, it's intentional. It reduces the surface that radar can detect and makes it harder for lookouts to spot. Most LPVs are built from fiberglass stretched over wooden frames. The materials are light, cheap, and easy to shape under a tarp with basic tools. Since the mid-2000s, these boats have become more refined with every new build, smoothing edges, lowering profiles, and improving balance. The second group is more advanced, the self-propelled semi-submersible, or SPSS. These sit even lower than LPVs. They use ballast tanks, simple chambers that can be flooded with water, to ride almost submerged, leaving only a canopy or slender spine visible. They don't dive like military submarines, but they mimic the look. For the people funding these builds, the math is straightforward. A semi-sub, or LPV, might cost $1 to $2 million to put together. That's expensive compared with a fishing boat, but cheap compared with commercial ships. And the payoff dwarfs the cost. Even a modest run carries thousands of pounds of cocaine. Some of the larger hulls have carried 10 tons or more. A single successful trip pays for the boat, the jungle yard, and the crew's wages many times over. With numbers like that, losing a few boats to patrols or scuttling isn't a disaster. It's just part of the business model. But while the design serves the financiers, the ride is brutal for the crew. Inside, the space is hot, damp, and suffocating. Fiberglass hulls sweat in the heat, dripping condensation. Diesel fumes fill the air. Fuel sloshes in flexible bladders tied down along the walls. Ventilation is poor, so oxygen thins while carbon monoxide builds. Men sleep on thin mats over tanks or curl up between bales of cargo. Food is dry and simple. Water is rationed carefully. Runs can last days, sometimes weeks. By the end, crews stagger out, pale and coughing, if they make it at all. Some builds, though, prove that these aren't just crude jungle toys. In July 2010, a raid near the Colombia-Ecuador border uncovered what reporters dubbed a super sub. It was 74 feet long, diesel-electric powered, wrapped in carbon fiber and Kevlar, and fitted with a proper conning tower. It wasn't designed to just ride low. It could dive deeper and stay hidden. Authorities estimated its range at about 6,800 nautical miles, or roughly 7,800 miles. That's the kind of endurance you expect from